Old and fat panties, my husband said to my friends. I took revenge with his best friend. When my husband mocked me in public, calling my panties old and fat in front of our friends, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't anger that followed. It was silence, observation, and clarity. I realized his humiliation wasn't a joke. It was a way to assert control. And that same night, I made the one choice he would never expect, not to hurt him loudly, but to reclaim what he had taken from me: dignity, desire, and power. Revenge didn't come with shouting. It came with calm, and with the look on his face when he understood that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If this story helps you understand that some betrayals are final, please leave a like and subscribe. There are moments when humiliation becomes so complete and so public that something fundamental breaks inside you. When the person who's supposed to protect your dignity instead weaponizes your vulnerability for entertainment. When cruelty disguised as humor reveals exactly how little value they place on your feelings and your worth. The night my husband Marcus made a crude joke about my underwear at a dinner party with our closest friends, loud enough for everyone to hear, laughing at my mortification as if my pain was the punchline, that was the night I understood our marriage was already over. That whatever love or respect had existed between us had died long before this moment, that all that remained was deciding how to end it, and whether to make him understand the magnitude of what he'd destroyed. What Marcus didn't expect was that my revenge wouldn't come through screaming or confrontation, but through calculated choice that would hurt him in ways he'd never anticipated. A choice involving his best friend Daniel, who'd witnessed Marcus's cruelty, and who offered me something Marcus had stopped providing years ago: desire, respect, and the recognition of my worth. My name is Adriana Santos, and I'm 35 years old. I'd been married to Marcus for 9 years when the public humiliation occurred that would catalyze the end of our marriage. 9 years during which I'd slowly normalized his pattern of making jokes at my expense, dismissing my feelings when I objected, treating me as acceptable target for humor that was often cruel even when framed as affectionate teasing. Marcus worked in sales, was charismatic and entertaining in social situations, valued being seen as funny and engaging above almost everything else, including my dignity and feelings. I worked as a graphic designer, had built modest but meaningful career, had maintained my own identity and friendships, even as Marcus's need for social dominance had increasingly made me uncomfortable in group settings. The incident that would destroy our marriage happened at a dinner party at our friend's house. 6 couples total, people we'd known for years, intimate group where everyone was supposed to feel safe and comfortable. We'd been drinking wine, having relaxed conversation, the kind of easy social evening that was supposed to strengthen friendships rather than exposing fractures in marriages. At some point during the evening, I'd gotten up to get something from my purse, and as I bent slightly, my shirt rode up in the back, briefly exposing the waistband of my underwear. Simple cotton panties, practical and comfortable, the kind of thing most people wear daily without thinking about it. Marcus noticed and decided this was comedy gold. "Adriana, your granny panties are showing," he announced loudly to the entire table. "And they look old and fat, just like—" He stopped himself before completing the comparison, but the implication was clear and devastating. My underwear looked old and fat just like me, just like my body, just like everything about me that he apparently found laughable and worth mocking publicly. He laughed at his own joke, clearly expecting others to join in, treating my visible mortification as part of the entertainment. The table went silent. Everyone looked uncomfortable, some looking at Marcus with expressions of disapproval, others looking at me with sympathy or embarrassment on my behalf. Nobody laughing at the cruel joke Marcus had made. Our friend Daniel, Marcus's best friend since college, looked genuinely angry, his jaw tight in a way that suggested he was controlling himself from saying something confrontational. But Marcus seemed oblivious to the room's reaction, kept chuckling to himself as if he'd delivered the funniest line of the evening rather than having just publicly humiliated his wife. I felt my face burning, felt the weight of everyone's attention on me, and on my exposed underwear that Marcus had just mocked, felt something inside me break in a way that felt permanent and irreversible. This wasn't the first time Marcus had made jokes at my expense. He'd been doing it for years, always dismissing my hurt feelings as me being too sensitive. always insisting he was just teasing and that I should learn to take a joke. But this was different. This was public humiliation about my body and my underwear in front of people I cared about. This was cruelty delivered with apparent enjoyment. This was Marcus choosing to make me feel small and worthless because it got him attention, even if that attention was disapproving rather than appreciative. I didn't confront Marcus at the party. I calmly adjusted my shirt, returned to my seat, participated minimally in conversation for the rest of the evening, while Marcus continued being entertaining and social as if nothing had happened. I watched him perform his charismatic persona, watched him charm and engage with everyone except me, watched him completely fail to register that he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that he'd damaged something fundamental that couldn't be repaired with casual apology, or claims that he'd just been joking. Daniel walked us to our car when the party ended. Before we got in, he pulled me aside while Marcus was distracted with his phone. "That comment he made was completely out of line," Daniel said quietly, his voice combining anger and concern. "You didn't deserve that, Adriana. Nobody deserves to be humiliated like that, especially not by their spouse, especially not in front of friends. I'm sorry he did that to you." The validation and support from Daniel was the first acknowledgement I'd received all evening that Marcus's behavior had been unacceptable, that my hurt was legitimate rather than me being oversensitive. "Thank you for saying that," I responded, surprised by how much Daniel's words meant, how starved I'd been for someone to acknowledge that Marcus's treatment of me wasn't acceptable or normal. I don't think he even realizes what he did, or if he does realize, he doesn't think it matters. That's somehow worse than if he'd been deliberately cruel. This was just casual cruelty, entertainment for him, my feelings not even significant enough to consider. Daniel looked like he wanted to say more but held back, probably recognizing that criticizing his best friend's behavior to that friend's wife was complicated territory even when the criticism was justified. But in that brief exchange, something shifted. I felt seen and valued by Daniel in ways Marcus hadn't made me feel in years, felt the possibility of being desired and respected, rather than mocked and diminished. The drive home was silent. Marcus seemed to sense I was upset, but didn't apologize or acknowledge what he'd done. Just turned on music and drove while I sat beside him, feeling the growing distance between us, feeling the marriage die in real time, even though the official ending was still to come. When we got home, Marcus went straight to bed, still oblivious or indifferent to the damage he'd done, but I couldn't sleep. I sat in our living room processing what had happened, recognizing that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of Marcus treating my dignity as expendable, my feelings as irrelevant, my worth as something he could casually diminish whenever it served his need for attention or entertainment. I'd been tolerating unacceptable treatment, had been accepting his gaslighting that my hurt was me being too sensitive rather than him being genuinely cruel. The public humiliation had stripped away all the rationalizations I'd been using to stay in the marriage, had made undeniable what I'd been avoiding for years. I deserved better, and Marcus was never going to provide it. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Daniel. "Are you okay? I can't stop thinking about what happened tonight. Marcus was way out of line. You deserve so much better than to be treated like that. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I stared at the message for a long time, recognizing it for what it was. Not just friendly concern, but an opening, an indication that Daniel was offering something more than just support, that he was interested in me in ways that went beyond friendship, that the door Marcus had opened with his cruelty could lead somewhere Marcus would never anticipate or want. I could ignore the message, could maintain appropriate boundaries, could handle the end of my marriage to Marcus without complications of involving his best friend. Or I could walk through the door Marcus's cruelty had opened, could choose myself and my desires and my need to feel valued, could let Marcus understand through irreversible consequences that some betrayals destroy everything, including the friendships he valued. I texted back, "Can you meet me? Now? I need to talk to someone who sees me as more than a punchline." Daniel responded immediately, "Tell me where." We met at a bar that was still open, quiet enough for conversation, but public enough to be appropriate for two people who weren't having an affair. Yet. Daniel arrived 10 minutes after me, looked concerned and protective in ways that made me feel cared for rather than mocked. sat across from me and listened while I processed everything I'd been tolerating in my marriage to Marcus. All the ways he'd been diminishing me while I'd been accepting that diminishment as if it were normal or deserved. "You're not too sensitive," Daniel said firmly when I mentioned Marcus's constant accusation. "He's been cruel. What he said tonight was cruel. The pattern you're describing, making jokes at your expense, dismissing your feelings when you object, making you feel like the problem is your reactions rather than his behavior. That's emotional abuse, Adriana. That's not normal teasing between spouses. That's systematic diminishment of someone he's supposed to love and protect." Hearing someone name Marcus's pattern as abuse was validating and devastating simultaneously. I'd known something was wrong, had felt hurt and diminished for years, but I'd internalized Marcus's framing that I was oversensitive, that I needed to learn to take a joke, that the problem was my reactions rather than his actions. Having Daniel, Marcus's best friend, someone who'd known him for 20 years, explicitly say that Marcus's behavior was abusive gave me permission to trust my own perceptions, to recognize that my hurt was legitimate and my marriage was damaging me. "I'm leaving him," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it. "After tonight, after years of this pattern, I'm done. I deserve better. I deserve someone who builds me up rather than tears me down, who protects my dignity rather than weaponizing my vulnerability, who sees me as valuable rather than as acceptable target for cruel jokes." "You do deserve better," Daniel agreed. "You deserve someone who recognizes how incredible you are, who values you, who would never treat you the way Marcus treats you." The way he said it, the intensity in his eyes as he spoke, made clear that he wasn't just speaking generally about what I deserved. He was offering himself as alternative, as someone who could provide what Marcus had failed to provide. What happened next was inevitable and calculated simultaneously. Daniel and I left the bar and went to his apartment. What occurred there was technically infidelity, technically betrayal of my marriage to Marcus, technically violation of Daniel's friendship with Marcus, but it felt like reclamation of my body that Marcus had mocked, of my sexuality that Marcus had ignored or made conditional, of my worth that Marcus had spent years systematically destroying. Being with Daniel was everything intimacy with Marcus hadn't been in years. Passionate, mutual, built on desire and respect rather than on obligation and criticism. I stayed with Daniel until morning, then returned home before Marcus woke up, showered away the evidence of where I'd been, prepared myself for the conversation that would end my marriage. When Marcus finally emerged from our bedroom around 10, I was sitting at our kitchen table with divorce papers I'd downloaded and printed, with documentation of his pattern of public humiliation and cruel jokes I'd compiled from texts and social media over years, with calm resolution that must have been visible on my face, because Marcus immediately knew something fundamental had changed. "We need to talk," I said simply. "Last night wasn't just one bad joke. It was the culmination of years of you treating me cruelly, making me the target of your humor, dismissing my feelings when I told you how much your jokes hurt me. I'm done tolerating it. I'm filing for divorce. This marriage is over." Marcus's response cycled through the familiar patterns: denial that his joke had been that bad, minimization suggesting I was overreacting, deflection claiming I was being dramatic and throwing away 9 years of marriage over one comment. But I'd prepared for all his typical responses, had steel in my spine that hadn't been there before, had the memory of feeling desired and valued by someone else giving me strength to refuse to accept Marcus's gaslighting anymore. "It wasn't one comment," I said firmly. "It was 9 years of comments just like it. 9 years of you making me feel worthless and unattractive and acceptable to mock publicly. 9 years of me telling you your jokes hurt me and you dismissing my feelings as oversensitivity. 9 years of you choosing your need for attention over my dignity and my worth. This marriage has been over for a long time, Marcus. Last night just made it impossible for me to continue pretending otherwise." Marcus tried various approaches over the following hour: anger at me for being unreasonable, pleading for another chance, promises to change his behavior if I'd just give him opportunity to prove himself. But I remained firm in my decision, unmoved by his sudden remorse that only appeared once consequences became real. Eventually, Marcus asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Is there someone else? Is this about another man?" I could have lied, could have denied that anyone else was involved, Could have kept my night with Daniel private to avoid complicating the divorce. But I wanted Marcus to understand the full consequences of his cruelty, wanted him to feel the betrayal and loss that his behavior had earned, wanted him to know that the door he'd opened with his public humiliation had led exactly where he'd never want it to lead. Yes, I said simply, there is someone else, someone who values me, who desires me, who would never mock me publicly or make me feel worthless. Someone who sees me as incredible rather than as acceptable target for cruel jokes. You opened the door to this, Marcus, when you chose to humiliate me rather than cherish me. You created the space where someone else could step in and provide what you stopped providing years ago. Marcus's face went through several expressions as he processed what I was saying. Shock, hurt, and then calculation as he tried to figure out who the other man might be. Who? He demanded. Who have you been fucking while you're still married to me? Who's the person you've betrayed our marriage with? The question was rich with irony, given that Marcus had been emotionally betraying our marriage for years through his pattern of cruelty and disrespect, but I didn't point out the hypocrisy. Your best friend, I said calmly. Daniel. He saw how you treated me last night. He told me you were out of line, that I deserved better, that your behavior toward me was abusive. And he was right. He's been more supportive and validating in one evening than you've been in years. So yes, Marcus, I slept with your best friend. I let him touch me and desire me and make me feel valued in all the ways you failed to do. And it was incredible, not because of the physical pleasure, though that was significant, but because of finally feeling seen and wanted rather than mocked and diminished. The revelation devastated Marcus in ways I'd anticipated and intended. The infidelity itself was painful for him, but the fact that it was with Daniel, his best friend, someone he'd known for 20 years, someone he'd trusted completely, that added dimension of betrayal that made the situation irreversible. He couldn't just forgive me and work on our marriage because his best friend was now involved, because every time he'd see Daniel, he'd be reminded of this betrayal, because the friendship itself was destroyed along with the marriage. You did this to get back at me, Marcus said, his voice combining hurt and anger. You fucked my best friend as revenge for one stupid joke I made. That's insane, Adriana. That's vindictive and cruel in ways that are so far beyond anything I've ever done to you. It wasn't about revenge, I corrected, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It was about recognizing that my marriage was over, that you'd destroyed it through years of cruelty I'd tolerated too long, and about choosing to be with someone who actually values me. The fact that it hurts you, the fact that it's your best friend, the fact that this will have consequences for multiple relationships, that's not unfortunate collateral damage, Marcus. That's proportionate consequences for years of you treating me as expendable and worthless. You wanted me to understand that I wasn't valuable enough to protect or respect. Now you get to understand what it feels like to lose something you valued, because you took it for granted and treated it carelessly. Marcus and I separated immediately. I moved in with Daniel, making the affair and my new relationship completely public and undeniable. The social consequences were exactly what I'd anticipated. Our friend group was shocked and divided, some people sympathetic to me given Marcus's pattern of public humiliation, others judgmental about the infidelity and about me moving so quickly from marriage to affair. Everyone uncomfortable with the destruction of both a marriage and a long friendship simultaneously. Marcus's relationship with Daniel was destroyed completely and permanently. 2 decades of friendship ended the moment Marcus learned I'd slept with Daniel, ended even more definitively when Daniel made clear he wasn't apologizing, that he had genuine feelings for me and intended to pursue a real relationship rather than treating the night together as drunken mistake. Marcus felt doubly betrayed. By wife who'd cheated, and by best friend who'd welcomed that cheating. By 2 people he'd trusted who'd chosen each other over loyalty to him. The divorce was contentious and painful. Marcus fought every aspect of it, seemed more focused on punishing me for the infidelity than on reaching reasonable settlements. But ultimately, we reached agreement that divided our modest assets relatively equitably, that formalized the end of marriage that had been dying for years before the affair had made that death undeniable and public. My relationship with Daniel continued after the divorce finalized, evolved from affair into legitimate partnership built on mutual respect and desire, rather than on revenge or rebound. We've been together now for 2 years since that night when Marcus's cruelty opened door that neither of us closed. What we have isn't perfect. Relationships built on affairs while previous marriages are ending often carry complications and guilt that simpler relationships don't have. But what Daniel provides, respect for my feelings, appreciation for my worth, unwillingness to mock or diminish me for his own entertainment, those things make the complications worthwhile. Marcus, from what I hear through remaining mutual friends, has struggled significantly with the double betrayal of wife and best friend simultaneously. He's dated some but hasn't remarried, apparently having difficulty trusting either romantic partners or close friends after having been betrayed by both. Whether he's learned anything about how his own behavior contributed to the marriage's end, whether he's recognized that his pattern of cruelty created the vulnerability that Daniel walked into, whether he takes any responsibility for his role in what happened, that's unclear. Part of me hopes he's gained self-awareness and has changed his treatment of subsequent partners. Part of me doesn't particularly care what he's learned or how he's changed, because he's no longer my concern or my responsibility. What I learned from Marcus's public humiliation and from my calculated revenge through affair with his best friend is that some betrayals are final, that certain cruelties destroy relationships so completely that whatever follows doesn't require apology or restraint, that reclaiming dignity sometimes means making choices that hurt the person who hurt you in ways that feel proportionate even if they're not conventionally ethical. Marcus spent years teaching me that my worth was negligible, that my dignity was expendable, that my feelings were acceptable casualties of his entertainment. When I finally internalized that lesson fully, when I finally believed that I owed him nothing because he'd given me nothing worth protecting, the revenge that followed wasn't shouting or confrontation. It was calm, deliberate choice to be with someone who valued me while letting Marcus live with consequences of having thrown that away through his cruelty. My name is Adriana Santos. My husband mocked my underwear in front of our friends, called it old and fat in public humiliation that broke something fundamental inside me. His best friend witnessed that cruelty, offered validation and support, recognized my worth in ways Marcus had stopped recognizing years earlier. The affair that followed was technically betrayal, technically revenge, technically violation of friendship and marriage simultaneously. But it was also reclamation, of dignity Marcus had stolen, of desire he'd killed, of worth he'd systematically destroyed. The revenge didn't come with shouting. It came with calm, calculated choice that hurt Marcus in ways he'd never anticipated. And with the look on his face when he understood that the door he'd opened with his cruelty had led exactly where he'd never want it to lead, to his wife in his best friend's arms, to the destruction of both his marriage and his oldest friendship, to consequences that were proportionate to years of treating me as worthless and expendable. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Marcus learned that lesson through loss of everything he'd taken for granted. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that some betrayals are final, please like and subscribe.